I'm honored to be speaking to interviewing not just a very talented journalist that specializes on the African continent, but also one of my good friends, Buster Kirchner from Denmark. Mostly, I think over the last few years, been based in Zambia, in Lusaka. So I thought this was a good time to speak to him, considering Zambia just notched their first win of the 2024 Wafcon against Senegal, winning 3-2 in a very chaotic, very entertaining match. Before we speak about the actual match itself, just a reminder that the physical edition of Africa as a Country is out right now. So if you would like to support the podcast, if you'd like to support Africa as a Country, you can find the link to purchase the physical edition below in the description. But we move on to the actual match. Buster, you sent me a video. You were watching the match. It looked like a very lively location. Where were you watching from?
No, thank you so much, Maher, for inviting me on this podcast. I was watching the game from an area called Long Acres, which is like in Lusaka, the capital city of Zambia, and quite in like a diplomatic business area of the city, but also a place where people just gather when they need a drink or two. And this was a very small bar. And actually, funny enough, I went there like 5 or 10 minutes before the game, and the bar owner hadn't paid for his subscription to the channel, so we had to wait for 5 or 10 minutes into the game when it was 1-0 for the Senegalese. But yeah, it ended up positively from the Zambian perspective, winning 3-2.
So is that common in Zambia is to have people go to bars and to have people even know that a match is happening, the Copper Queens are playing, and for people to be excited and to go to bars and pay for drinks and watch the match together. Because speaking from, let's say, mostly North Africa, let's say Algeria, Tunisia, many people won't even have known that Algeria played Botswana a few days ago, and they wouldn't really be that excited to get together to watch the match in cafes and stuff. So can you just tell me if that's the case in Zambia?
It's very normal here in Zambia that people are watching the games from bars and restaurants and at public places. That's very normal on the male and the female side of football. Um, Especially a day like today, where the kickoff was 18 hours Zambian time. A lot of people would just get off work and then realize, oh, there's a match, and then pop into to the nearest bar or restaurant. So that's pretty charming in a way, that people just pop by. And I think we were probably 15, 20 people inside this small bar, very, very small bar. But outside of it, outside of the windows, you would have at least twice as many. So a very normal thing. And, the bar owner will complain and say, you have to buy a Coca-Cola or beer to stay here. But some of especially the younger audience, they just pop by.
And can we talk about the popularity then of the Copper Queens? Because I think Zambia on the continent and internationally maybe is one of the more underrated national teams when you talk about football history. To this day, I think people don't really consider them maybe a top 10 African football nation. I would definitely argue that they're in the top
Mm.
15. But if you go by accomplishments, obviously winning an AFCON, doing fairly well in the Olympics, finishing runner-up at another AFCON, some historic names, of course, going back to the 60s, but even more recently as well. Um, that said, that's usually the men's side of the game. The women's side of the game in recent years has taken off to another level as well. So can you talk to me about the popularity of that women's team? For example, I'll give you a little bit of a difficult question. Is Barbara Banda more well known or more popular than Patsandaka?
That's a good one. That's a good one. I think actually those two in terms of popularity are probably on the same level, the same stage in a way. Those two names that you mentioned there, Barbara Banda and Patsandaka, those are like household names. Like, go to any rural village in Zambia, talk to persons of any age, any gender, any whatever identity we can talk about, and you'll find them really being familiar with these players. I think we have to look at the dynamics between the men's side and the Copper Queens here, because as some of the listeners might know as well, the Zambian male football team, they won the AFCON 2012, but then followed a very tough period for them with a lot of downfall. And in the same period of time, you would have this female side, the Copper Queens. emerging as a really strong side with the of course the under 17 World Cup in 2014, which was Barbara Banda's entrance to the scene, kind of starting this whole era. So I think we have to look at the dynamics between the two teams. That when the men was on their way down, the women was going the other way up, which gave Zambian football fans something to look out for. So that would probably be my fast analysis. And then, of course, as in any team, especially a team of Zambia's size or country of Zambia's size, when you have a team, going to the Olympics, going to the World Cup, I guess it doesn't really matter that much if we're talking about an under 20 squad or female squad, then they will be highly popular. And that's also been the case for the Shepolopolo, as we like to call them.
Yeah, hell of a name.
Hell
Um,
of a name.
yeah. If we talk about, I mean, can we just talk about some of the players? Obviously, everybody knows Barbara Benda because she's the African Footballer of the
Mhm.
Year. I
Mhm.
think second leading scorer in the NWSL currently in America with 18 goals. Um, we also have Rachel Kundenanji, who's obviously also captured the headlines as the most expensive female player when she made her move to Bay FC, I think for around, I think it was around 800,000 euros or dollars or something like that. Um, who do you have any inkling of how Zambia all of a sudden started to produce some top tier talent? Was this like an institutional thing? Was this a spontaneous thing? Is this just coincidence?
Look, I think it's a combination of many factors, but definitely um, we need to applaud for us the Association of Zambia and their investment in female football, the league structures they have built. In Zambia, you have now two rather professional leagues. Um, Even the second tier is a national league. It's really well organized, and on top of that, I think also, you know, as much as I would love to talk about female football isolated from the men's football, I think a proper analysis involves the men's football as well, because you know many of these female clubs they have built on the men's kind of club structure. So Green Buffaloes being one of Zambia's um, most historical clubs, and owned also by a state institution. I think it's a national service. If I'm not mistaken, please correct me if you're a Zambian listener. Um, these because a lot of the Zambian clubs are state-owned clubs representing either the air force or the police or etc. etc. So I think in the last 8, 10, 12 years, these state institutions have realized that okay, there's a potential in female football, and having seen the Barbara Bandas emerging in 2014, coming up from the youth ranks, I think this has been evident that, okay, female football is also, there are also economic possibilities here. There are commercial interests here as well. So they've kind of, understood that and really invested in it. Um, and I can also talk about maybe a small anecdote here. I'm running a small football project, social project, trying hard not to coin it as an academy in the northern part of Zambia. And we are located in a very rural area, but we sometimes do get requests on some of our players. So I mean, a lot is going on. Not only the big cities on the
You're talking
Commonwealth.
about, sorry, you're talking about boys and girls, or mostly girls?
So I'm actually talking about girls only here. So we run a team, under 17 team of young girls, not really, elite football, but just trying to bring them together, having a good time, all of that. But sometimes we do get requests from the elite teams. 2 years ago, we skipped a player to Ntindi Stars in Nakonde, which is very near the border to Tanzania, and she's now living full time playing football. And like 2 years ago, she stayed in a village like 20 kilometers from the nearest tarmac. And these stories are not just singular stories. They actually there are plenty of them. So it's quite interesting what's going on, not only from the top down, but also with all sorts of actors in Zambia's football pyramid. You see a lot of activities going on. uh, businessmen arranging private tournaments, all of that. And I think we need to really yeah support this tendency.
Can we talk about the game itself? What did you think of the Shepolopolo performance? Obviously, they drew the first match against Morocco 2-2. Even in that match, it was clear that going forward, they were going to be very difficult to stop. But then
Mhm.
some of the goals they conceded were pretty weak as well. Stupid mistakes for penalties. Not the best goalkeeping when Shebek scored the equalizing goal at the end of the game. Uh, in this match, again, it felt like it was very much back and forth. When Banda and Kundananji and Chanda and Chilufya sort of went forward, they seemed almost unstoppable. But at the same time, defensively, I think there were some questions to be had. What did you think of the match?
I think the depiction you just did is pretty on point. Um, you know, a few days ago, you invited me on this podcast. I thought, okay, let me do a bit more preparation than I would have done otherwise for a game, which I would just turn on my TV and watch the game. So this morning, I bought a few newspapers. I talked to people around me in my office and so on and so forth. And in the Daily Nation, one of Zambia's newspapers, there was an interview with Nora Häuptle, which I think we pronounce her Swiss German name. Um, and she really emphasized the defensive part of it, the tactical organization, saying, now we need to be better defensively. We should not concede that many goals. And then after 5 minutes, you concede a goal against against Senegal. So that was a bit funny and unfortunately a bit ironic as well. And to be frank, it seems like Zambia can play in no other way. This seems to be the order of the day because they are so like they are incredibly dangerous going forward. Like every time one of the wingers, if it's Kononanchi, if it's like you say Chilufya, if it's Banda, if it's I really love Grace Chanda on the midfield. I think she's really good with the ball and but it's so dangerous. But then again, Senegal they have very little possession for like 25 minutes, and they create a chance out of nowhere. Also being awarded a penalty in the second half today. So I saw the game in the similar way that you did. A very open game that Zambia somehow won, but I think also we need to ask some serious questions about Zambia's continuous performance here because they didn't follow the game plan
At least it's entertaining, though. I think, if
too
anything,
much, too
if
much.
if you're a neutral, I think if you haven't watched the match at the Wafcon yet, I would highly recommend tuning into watching Zambia play. Not only are you going to be watching the African Footballer of the Year, the most expensive player in world football as well, but it's just sheer entertainment value. Lots of back and forth, lots of goals as well. And what is the general feeling like in Zambia? Do people think that this team can win a WAFCON? Obviously, Zambia's never won a WAFCON before. Nigeria are usually the favorites. South Africa are defending champions. Morocco obviously are hosts as well, and people think that they could be tough. How do people feel about Zambia?
There's a general sense of most people are a bit skeptical. Um, I wouldn't regard the general ambience as being optimistic here. I think it's the first tournament that Zambia, the first WAFCON that Zambia goes into as favorites, as among the top 4 or 5 teams. Even the last time in Morocco 3 years ago, we didn't anticipate the bronze medal that followed. So, and Zambia being a team playing this kind of you know transitions football. Um, when we have to create the games, it seems very difficult. So I don't feel there's a sense of optimism. And I also think it's quite interesting what you said in the beginning that if you go to many of the cities and towns in Algeria, you might not even find people following that much or knowing about the exact fixtures and so on and so forth. And I think it's the same in Zambia. But then when they play, the atmosphere can change rapidly. It changes out of nowhere, like what I said. A few people are going home after work, and all of a sudden you have a crowd of 50 people watching. Um, and a guy who didn't even have a GD subscription 5 minutes into the game. So things are changing very fast. And let's see if they beat Congo in the next one. If they do so convincingly, we we might have some optimism all of a sudden. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it would be similar in Algeria. I think once the team has some success, then people will start to get interested. But if they're used to a team that's usually not even competing in WAFCON or definitely hasn't ever seriously had a chance to win one, I think people are not going to pay as much attention.
Mm.
You covered the WAFCON in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you went to Morocco,
Yeah.
and obviously you've covered several AFCONs as well. That's where usually we meet and we spend some time with one another. But if you were to compare, again, we don't like to compare like the, the men to the women's thing. It's a little bit boring, but do you at least get the, because one of my favorite things about AFCON is this feeling of the footballing family, the African footballing family, whether it's journalists or administrators, people coming together, exchanging ideas, meeting again. Did you get that feeling at WEFCON, even though it was your first? And I think you're planning on going again, perhaps a little bit this year. Um, what are you most looking forward to, and what's your general feeling? How is it a little bit different, and how is it similar to compare to covering an AFCON?
Uh, I'll say yes. It feels like, and it might sound like a super cliche, but this is like being in a family, being surrounded by fellow journalists, being surrounded by fellow football administrators. And I totally support you, Maher, on the fact that we should not compare these two too much. But the men's football, for many of us, that's how we grew up, and now we're getting to understand and to learn about female football. So on the other hand, it's a quite natural comparison. And I think if you've been to a men's AFCON and you think it's like amazing, and you think it's like being, we're all sharing this, and you're very close, whether you're a fan or journalist, I think that can even be multiplied when you're attending a women's one, because everything is smaller, everything is more compact. Um, so no, I definitely enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward for all these, small, beautiful stories that are always there, the narratives, the the small match highlights that you didn't anticipate, or that one player that all of a sudden just enters the scene with a lot of you know uh, brilliance or whatever. So there are so many things, and sometimes they can even be hard to expect. Um, Last time, obviously, Morocco as the host nation making it to the final was the big story. So as for any other tournament, I think that will also decide a lot this time around, because if we return to today's game, Zambia and Senegal, we saw empty stands. We didn't see we didn't see that many spectators. So I really hope that Morocco and the North African teams will go far, so we also get a bit more flavor in the stands.
Um, I think the last time you were there, you got a chance to meet with the South African goalkeeper Andile Dlamini, and I think you told me that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that was an interview that you were really impressed by her, if I'm not mistaken. And I think you guys spoke about faith and football, if I'm not mistaken. Could you just recap that for me again? Like how was that experience speaking to her? Obviously, sorry to cut you.
That
She obviously had a great game in the first match day of this WAFCON, keeping a shutout 2-0 against Ghana.
Shout out to Anlin Tlamini, a very, very strong personality. And as a journalist, and Mahe, I'm sure you feel the same way sometimes. You make interviews that you forget an hour later, and you make interviews that actually stay with you for perhaps the rest of your life. And I think this was one of them. So we played table tennis. We played table tennis in the players' hotel the day before the final, the day before she won the Women's African Cup of Nations. And we did so not only for 20 minutes as a PR stunt, we did so for like 2 hours or so. And
This is crazy.
and and I think it also connects to your previous question or point, that the accessibility and that family feeling that you get in a men's AFCON is just even stronger at a women's. And that was special. And she had at that time recently recovered from a very serious COVID illness, and she had done so. So through her faith. That was how she explained it to me, by believing in the power of Christ. she's a devoted Christian, and shared these stories about how at some point she was very low, very low, and physically and mentally didn't think she would make it or continue with football, and here she was, I think, a year and some months later, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so very special story, and these women, they do not come with the glamour and with the status of like the men. They come from humble beginnings, humble backgrounds. Even the South Africans who are regarded the probably best paid players of this Wafcon, at least some of them. So that was incredible, and I'm sure we'll have many similar stories like that one. Yeah.
And I just wanted to finish the interview sort of by speaking about this concept of faith in football, because if I'm not mistaken, this is something that you've written about extensively, that you've researched extensively. And I also know just from there's a lot of Zambian vloggers on YouTube, and sometimes some of them, students, they'll come to study in Algeria. A lot of Zambians, they study in Algeria for almost for free. Good, nice government exchange program. A lot of them vlog their experiences. I just get to see their day to day, and I see it within the football, within this. It seems like it's a very religious country, very Christian country in that sense. Um, so can you just maybe touch up on that a little bit? Is how does faith, out of what you've seen firsthand, how does it sort of affect, or how does it find its way into football? And maybe perhaps if you want interested in speaking about some of your research, I think everybody would be fascinated to hear more about it.
No, no, yeah. Thank you so much for this question, Maher. And this is when you have to stop me when I'm talking too much, because obviously that's my master thesis after that
This is a
quite.
question that's better in after the match on a balcony in Yaoundé in a rented area, where we could talk for 3 or 4 hours more than
Yeah,
Zoom.
but I
But
I
yeah,
I can do it short, but yeah, that's exactly true what you're saying. But as you rightly point out, Christianity in Zambia is huge. It's huge. Zambia, terms itself a Christian nation, which is also written as a preamble in the country's constitution. And there's this phrase or phenomenon which maybe kind of encapsulates it, which is bola na lesa, which means football with God, and that emerged after the men's under 20 won the AFCON at home in 2017, and it's also now a popular song, a pop song by Zambian artists. And in that final of that year, and I'll do it short, I'll do it brief. In the final of that year, there was a Senegalese player in the game against Zambia in the men's under 20 AFCON who threw a kind of object. We don't know exactly what it was into the goal, into the net, and everyone regarded that as an act of juju, an act of some would call it witchcraft, some would call it magic, but in Zambia it's coined as juju. In South Africa it's muti. And the Zambian players started praying, and in Zambia football has been Pentecostalized, and so we talk about the Pentecostalization of football. You have a lot of pastors into football, praying for the teams before the games, and a lot of spectators are viewing and watching these games in a highly religious manner. They would regard things that occurs on the pitch as something which is influenced by God or you know, by Christian elements. And this is not only players and administrators and coaches, etc. It's also fans. So there's a kind of language and communication around this, which just kind of surrounds the sport. And I'll round this up by maybe mentioning a case from this morning. So in today's Daily Nation, as always, you have the sports pages on the back, in the back of the newspaper, and there was an interview with the Zambian national coach Nora Hauple, and then there was also an interview with a guy called Pastor Makembo. Pastor Makembo has for many years been not only the chairman of Zambian Football Fans Association, but also a pastor who is praying for the team before the games, a pastor who is always connecting Christian rhetoric with football. And so he was today. He said that God had not this time around allowed him to travel to Morocco as a fan, but he had a lot of advice. So there's this sense and this notion that football has to be Christianized, and we have to have a Christian pastor kind of, sanctifying the playing field or the players. So yeah, that's a bit of what I've engaged myself in the last few years, and yeah, allow me to recommend this. It's a scholarly area. Basically, there are quite a number of quite amazing scholars around the continent researching this topic.
Thank you for that. I think I remember interviewing another colleague of ours from Nigeria, Solace Chokwu, a few years ago, and he said superstition is the attempt to explain um, sort of the arbitrary, the randomness. And he says football is so random, and so of course, sort of try and explain sometimes the randomness we add, whether it's religion or superstition or something else. Um, that's how he was, I thought, pretty brilliantly explained it. But and obviously, I feel like we know this, but just as a disclaimer, this is obviously a judgment. We're not judging anybody here. These are just observations and research and things like that. People choose to, I think, engage with football the way they want. You have anything to add about the Shepolopolo, the Copper Queens, before we wrap it up?
Um, Maybe just to say that the Copper Queens, they are quite an amazing squad of football players in terms of what's happening on the pitch. I think we have highlighted that a bit in our brief chat here. And also, they don't seem to be that affected about what's happening outside the pitch. That might be my final point, Mahir, because we saw during Bruce Marquez' tenure, that's the previous Shepolopolo coach, there was a lot of, accusations and allegations around, sexual harassment of the players, which was very unfortunate. And the players, they just kept performing on the pitch. This time around, we have seen a recent election in FAS, Football Association of Zambia. It's been very messy. Um, they had to organize a re-election, and you know, but these players, they just gather in camp and they play football, and I think that's pretty amazing and also pretty surprising because usually we like to say that. And there's also a lot of evidence supporting that when you have all this political interference in football and ABCD, and when Nigeria doesn't pay their bonuses to the players, it of course affects them. But it seems like now we have a few different tournaments where Zambia's women, they just continue playing. So very resilient, very strong minded, and looking so much forward to watch them in the coming days and weeks.
And I think it's very fitting, especially for a Zambian side. I mean, throughout the history of their football, have dealt with things off the pitch, obviously, and then managed to overcome them on the pitch. Booster, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we'll be seeing each other soon, sometime soon, at least in the next 6 months for AFCON. But if not before then, thanks for sitting down again,
Yeah.
and we'll talk soon. Yeah.